reflect on most of this, it's really something else of the character that we mostly know. For example, as a kid, and I'm talking this in the 80s, before this was before the 1989 movie came out. The version that I knew as live action Batman was the Adam West version. I was born in 1982, so when we go to the Adam West version of Batman, it was really campy, all laughs, and the Rogues Gallery could get together, but they just planted a bomb that was obvious to find, and it was really nothing much developed. But it is really funny because as this was happening on television, the writers at DC Comics decided to give him, throughout the Silver Age, decided to give him more of a backstory, and that's why characters like Ra's al Ghul come along. So they explain in the way this character was trained, in the way why he is such an effective killing machine, what made him be in this killing machine. And throughout this time, when I was reading comics, but as I explained, Marvel was a little bit more aimed to kids. Was like this, got this monstrosity, you got to defeat it. Not in all of the stories, because around this time, Frank Miller has made a name for himself in the way that he had already worked in Marvel in making a revival of Daredevil. We switch a little bit of sides right now because this is really important. Daredevil is you can say that Daredevil is the poor man's Batman, or you could argue and say that is kind of a great value Batman if you want. But the thing is that Daredevil was having a lot of trouble because the pantheon of heroes of Marvel were growing more powerful. They were having more dimensions. Iron Man was getting a lot of dimension. Thor was getting a lot of dimensions, as well as Captain America, and they have powers that they could be explained. But the thing is with Daredevil is that Matt Murdock does not have. He has a super hearing ability. That's it. He can deflect, and he has greater responses to move. And it was kind of a lame character, but yet Marvel did not want to get rid of him. So that's when Frank Miller comes along and he makes the Daredevil Reborn story arc, in which Daredevil gets his identity cover gets blown over, so he has to resource mostly on his wits, and we saw this with in the season 3, which was sadly the last season of Netflix Daredevil. It was all around and surrounding this arc, which was the rebirth arc of Daredevil. So Frank Miller made a perhaps lame superhero, gave him such a huge dimension, and the thing is that campy Batman, it started, even though I had loads of respect to Adam West. I don't mean to disrespect his memory. He was not the person who wrote the show, and I think even though of the campiness, I think Adam West did a really great job in portraying the Batman that was on that time, because it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't his fault, and he made a good effort on it. And fight choreography is not what it is today, so it could have been a little bit better. But the thing is, that was the character that was in the comics. So but the thing is that to the Batman mythos, between the mythos inside the comic and the mythos that was created through the show, it became kind of a campy character. He was like the smart human who is tagging along with the Justice League. And in some sort of way, entering the 80s, many writers tried to get their hands. This was the time also where darker characters like Victor Sass, Hugo Strange were gaining a little bit more of momentum, and the Joker was kind of being left behind. But the thing is that they started with the Joker, making him again. When we got to the Bronze Age, we got a dark Joker again. We got a killing machine. We got a psychopath who's running the streets of Gotham. And just after the Reborn arc of Daredevil, DC recruits Frank Miller. Frank Miller was recruited so that he could write a one-shot graphic novel about Batman that was started a little bit earlier on with the Dark Knight series. The Dark Knight series, for many of you who don't know, even though it's one of his nicknames, right? The Dark Knight series, it was an annually imprint. It was only one that was made throughout the whole year, and then we got another story, and we got many of them. Even the Dark Knight Returns, which is the epitome of Batman and the most quintessential Batman story I think it has ever been written, right? And we're gonna get to that. Here we go. There's a lot of papers on the Dark Knight. So, when it came to Dark Knight Return, it was, and we're gonna put it like this: it was the Dark Knight Returns. It originally was titled Batman: The Dark Knight Returns, and it was in 1986. It was a 4-issue comic book miniseries starring Batman, and this one was written by Frank Miller and had an amazing illustration by Frank Miller himself in collaboration with Klaus Janson, which was obviously published by DC Comics. The series, when he was originally published, it was titled Batman: The Dark Knight, with different subtitles for each issue. For example, The Dark Knight Returns, The Dark Knight Triumphant, Hunt the Dark Knight, and The Dark Knight Falls, which explains the 4 main arcs that goes around to the story. As I was mentioning earlier, up to this point, even though the Rogues Gallery was growing a little bit more psychotic, Batman was gaining a little bit more of dimension, but not the one to this level, because without this this comic book miniseries, the 4-issue miniseries, we wouldn't have the 1989 version of the Tim Burton movie, which led to the animated series that led to this whole universe of dimensions that have been created for the Dark Knight. So, but the series was collected a year later in 1987. It was the 4 issues, they were collected into one graphic novel. And it is really interesting, sorry for that, because the Dark Knight Returns tells an alternative story of Bruce Wayne, who is 55 at the time of writing, is 55 years old, returns from retirement to fight crime and faces opposition from the Gotham City Police and the United States government. The story introduces Carrie Kelly as the new Robin and the hyper-violent street gang known as the Mutants. The story also features the return of classic foes as Two-Face and the Joker, and culminates with a confrontation against Superman, who works on behalf of the government. This is really amazing because this is the grandeur of Frank Miller's work. It was like they were given Batman, and there was a lot of excitement on DC to give Batman to Frank Miller, because what he did with Daredevil, it was high expectancy, and he did deliver, because the last part, I'm gonna throw a little bit of a spoilers, but I still recommend, even though I'm gonna throw a spoiler away, I truly recommend that you watch The Dark Knight Returns. It's available through the DC app. It's a really amazing movie. It's actually 3 hours long, and I think if you put the whole movie together, because it's divided in part 1 and part 2. And in part 1, you get this whole build up up until he defeats the mutants. He until up to this point, Superman has failed, has created an EMP that had led a massive power outage throughout the United States, and Batman is the only one who manages to keep Gotham in place while the other cities around the United States are falling into chaos. This pisses off the US government, so they send Superman to kill Batman. That's simple. You see, you hear it as that simple, but it's really more complex what Batman and the Joker go through. Two-Face is an interesting character because he doesn't work in the series as a foe, mostly as a support character, instead of the Joker, who is a full-time foe always. The Joker is going to be a foe. So the events, because geez, by this time DC was meddling with the multiverse theories, right? And in the Flashpoint DC multiverse, the events of the Dark Knight Returns were designated to occur on Earth 31. So, and besides that battle between Superman and Batman, that was the reason why they went with that title, because it's the quintessential moment that crowns Batman as the absolute super badass that he is, because he defeated Superman using his wit. He designed a mecha suit that could match the power. He made a lot of stuff that I'm not going to give away, but he defeats him. And it is funny because one of the closing panels is that I want you to remember the man who beat you. And it tells you a lot about the conviction, his resilience, which is one of his most underrated assets. It's not only the technology, it's his resilience. You're going against an alien who is powered by the sun to actually be sort of a god, and you're going with your wit against him, and making that statement is what staple Batman as an absolute badass, is what staple his place not only as a member of the Justice League, but as a co-leader of the Justice League. And it's really an amazing story arc. And as I was telling, The Dark Knight Returns, it was in the time in which Warner Brothers wanted to do something with Batman. When you had the Dark Knight Returns, right? It gained a lot of momentum. The old cartoon series were off. The whole image of this campy Adam West era had died. This is the defining moment in which he starts to get a real depth and dimension to the character itself. After this, we got stories like, for example, the whole Jason Todd incident, in which Jason Todd, if you don't know, is the second Robin. And it was funny because it was on an issue. They issued like a survey, right? And they were asking if they should have kept Jason Todd alive. And you have to note a lot of facts that were going into there. Is that the first Robin was Dick Grayson around the 80s. The writers at DC decided to give him a more mature look. Thing is that, and this is something that doesn't get discussed enough, is the fact that Dick Grayson has been molded a little bit. At one point, I believe that DC Comics wanted their characters to be a little bit stripped to real time in a sort of way. So in the 80s, Dick Grayson became Nightwing, and Nightwing operates by himself. So I think the original idea was that Dick Grayson eventually became Batman. So, but the thing is that obviously, as they wanted to grow, they had to draw a new Robin. And this new Robin will be Jason Todd, which is kind of a similar story, but it's different. I don't know. A lot of fans got a lot of hate from him because they felt that he was too much of a rogue. He was wrote to be a little bit arrogant. And the thing is that in the way that the character was built, it led fans to choose to kill him off. So it wasn't the writer's decision, it was the fans who, throughout a survey that was put out by DC Comics, decided that Jason Todd was gonna go. And you think that the mob is cruel, and you see Batman fans could be a little bit harsh if they don't want a character. So along comes the episode in which the Joker finally makes a trap in which he beats Jason Todd with a crowbar.